Nolan Bushnell is known as the father of the video game industry. The first video game product to spark the multi-billion-dollar industry was Computer Space. It was co-created by Nolan over 50 years ago. And now Nolan is a business tycoon who continually gives back, investing in education and new inventions that bring people together and strengthen the imagination. Nolan is one of the original tech innovators, co-founder of Atari, and was Steve Jobs' first boss.
I'm a student in high school, and I want to build a frequency counter. And I was wondering if you had any spare parts I could have. And he laughed, and he gave me the spare parts to build this frequency counter, and he gave me a job that summer in Hewlett-Packard.
Newsweek cites Bushnell as one of the 50 men who forever changed America. He shaped the gaming industry and has worked in countless mediums of entertainment, among those being Chuck E. Cheese, established in 1977. Now, 50 years later, tons and tons of projects after the fact, Nolan is an industry vet, but he hasn't let up for one moment. He is currently building interactive spaces offline and online with selfie museums and new creative takes on arcade spaces, with online NFTs and blockchain technology. A true champion of fun and bringing ideas to life on the edge. This time he sits down with Arcade Press for a very historic, exclusive interview. To both of us, obviously being the godfather of the gaming industry, or the father of the gaming industry, you know, it's now 50 years of Computer Space, 50 years of Atari. How does that make you feel looking back at, you know, the whole legacy of Atari coming on 50 years? I mean, relatively a new gaming industry, a new industry, and so much has happened, so much has changed in a short amount of time. How does it make you feel, and what do you see the next 50 years looking like for the video game industry?
You know, I've never been very excited about looking at my life in the rearview mirror. The thing that excites me is the shit I'm working on right now. And so 2 or 3 games that I'm architecting that have unique business models and kind of a different flair to them. I'm doing a lot of work in the physical game space. Are you acquainted with the Museum of Ice Cream and what we call selfie museums?
I think so. Yeah.
They're basically neat environments where people can go in, take selfies of themselves, and have kind of a different sort of visceral experience. Well, suppose there was a selfie museum that was all interactive. I like to say that if a selfie museum and an arcade had a baby, what would it look like?
Right.
And so I'm doing a thing called Zips Lab, which is an interactive selfie museum where you can come and you buy a ticket and you get to play as much as you want to. And what it does is it allows for a whole bunch of games that do not work well on a pay-per-play basis. And so it adds a whole panoply of games that people haven't played yet, which is fun for me. Anyway.
That sounds dope. No, that sounds great. Yeah. I'm really interested to see more of this and hear more about this concept. I know that a lot of museums and a lot of public spaces have been implementing, you know, selfie installations and mechanisms to allow people to interact more with the spaces and use hashtags and publicize it online. So I'm very much interested to see how that could influence arcades. I mean, that's a big thing about what our newsletter and podcast is about. It's about the legacy of arcades and the future of arcades. Do you see that that's the future of where arcades could go, being more interactive and more integrated with social media and camera technology?
Well, you know, there's the game business can no longer talk about it as the game business. There's so many. I mean, mobile is different than console, different than browser games, and then you have the whole physical space where you have Dave and Buster's and my son with 2-Bit Circus. has a whole different construct. Tyler with Polycade, again, a very old and yet new form factor construct. And so I think that all the fun for me has always been on the edge. What's the edge points that have not been explored yet? And I think, Brent's been doing that, and I intend to continue to do that. And Tyler with his business model and the games that are there, and the ways that the indie community can interface and all of a sudden have an outlet. These are all exciting things on the edge.
Yeah, most definitely. And I'm really excited to see where that, takes particularly public spaces, considering, how we've been affected with, the pandemic and how public spaces are affected. I mean, public spaces are key to community and games are key to community. I'm curious to your experience with, with being a carny as a young person. And I'm really curious. I feel like you'd be a great person to ask about, like, what's your perspective on the early coin-op era, and how did it influence arcade games and your particular perspective on gaming? Because when we think about arcade games, the first one we usually think about computer space, but depending on how we think about arcades and how we think about coin-operated games, and in that sense, there was an era before computer space, though they weren't video games. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. The arcade has gone through several sort of iterations that really made a lot of money selling penny peep shows. And you'd basically put a penny in and you'd see a bunch of cards that would flip that would look like animation. That happened at the turn of the century. There were a lot of those. There were also these kind of vignettes where there'd be a piece of glass in front of a model of a circus. And when you put a coin in, all of a sudden the ballerinas would twirl and they'd come alive and they'd be animated. A lot of these were built in 1910, 1920, and that was kind of a way that arcades looked. Then probably in the 50s, early 50s, there was a series of games that were mechanical, but they used essentially slide projector technology, where there was a light and a lens and a piece of film. And probably the best example was a game called Speedway from Chicago Coin. And they sold a bunch of them, and it was a driving game. Before that, there was a driving game in which there was a drum that had a roll, and you had to drop when you turned the wheel, the car would go to the left or the right to stay on the road. And if you drove off, you'd get points if you stayed on the road, and you'd get penalized if you fell off, if you drove off the road. These were all in the 40s and 50s. There was a lot of this innovation happening right after the Second World War. And then, of course, the ballyhoo, the pinball, was actually started in 1928, I think, if I remember correctly. And there's actually a very big link between the slot machine and the pinball, because during Prohibition, the mafia provided speakeasies, illegal alcohol, prostitution, gambling, and loan sharking.
Right.
When Prohibition was repealed, they still had three legs, and the gambling part moved from roulette wheels and poker tables to coin-operated machines. And there were these games called one balls and bingos that were nothing more than disguised gambling devices in places where gambling was made illegal. And so that kept on through my childhood, where I learned how to play the pinball bingo games, in my teens. So and so when pinballs became amusement only, they still carried that stench of being a mafia-based construct of gambling. And so a lot of places, New York City as an example, outlawed the pinball until probably the middle 80s. And it was just kind of interesting to climb into the history like that, to see what was happening. And in fact, a lot of my distributors were old mafioso guys.
Wow.
And
That's crazy.
That's wild.
That's wild.
like
Yeah.
my but a lot of time, but by the time I was there, it was second generation. And so they'd all kind of gone legitimate and everything. But my Minneapolis distributor's dad's name was Bullets.
Wow. Wow. That's fascinating, man. That is fascinating. What is it about arcades and arcade machines, coin-operated machines, that make them work so well? Is it some sort of, I kind of written about it and compared it to kind of like Monolith in 2001: A Space Odyssey. At least for me as a kid, it's kind of like that first time that, the apes, the humanoids are coming in contact with this alien technology, and in this, anything can happen and any idea can happen, sort of this, relationship with technology. What is it that makes this work? Is it because it's just fascinating and it's just tech and it's just something about the way that the games work are exciting to human beings? Why do arcade games still resonate with people in a world where, many arcades are not around in the same capacity that they were in the heyday?
I think it's bite-sized entertainment. And games are an encapsulation of a simulation. Defined rules, scoring. Scoring is something that somehow speaks to our DNA, I think. That if there's a score, we want to get a high score. And
Definitely.
if we got a score this game, we want to play again and get a higher score next time. I think it's somehow hardwired into our mind.
When did, for you, you kind of helped spearhead this whole new industry, this whole new aspect of entertainment and of commerce. What part was the most fascinating for you when culture kind of collided with that, when legislation collided with that, or other aspects of more established parts of American culture or world culture collided with what you were doing, and you were like, this is interesting. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect people to take it that way. For example, you talked about how Pong in a way helped women pick up guys, or at least court guys, or talk to guys at the bar. It was like a mechanism to help people get to know each other. Did you anticipate things like that? Were there other things like that happened? I mean, of course, we know that like Mortal Kombat and Midway, received a lot of controversy when their games had a lot of violence in the, fighting game scene. That's an interesting point of history where violence and legislation kind of collided with the video game industry. Are there other things like that happened? I mean, I didn't know that the mafia had, such a deep relationship with coin operation and that whole.
There's a couple of books I'm trying to think that kind of spell that out more definitively.
Yeah.
But in some ways, video games are in fact the training wheels of computer literacy. in the early days where we had video games, but we really didn't have personal computers yet,
Right.
there were countries, whole countries, that outlawed video games, going out video games. We didn't have the consumer ones yet. And the legacy of that is those countries fell way behind in the computer literacy of their population.
Wow.
Like when it came to the internet, Japan was so late to the party because they didn't have a precursor to the internet, which were dial-up modems that you could afford, because telephone lines were very expensive in Japan, and it wasn't like it is in the United States, where if you make a local call, it's free. In Japan, no matter, you were charged by the minute, no matter what you did. If you're using the phone, you were charged by the minute. And as a result, it took Japan a long time to catch up. And even today, if you look at internet savvy, Korea beats the shit out of all of them. And that was because they were the first to put fiber into every home, and very low cost. And the benefit that the Korean economy had because of that is massive.
Yeah, and then even China, they just lifted their ban off arcade games in 2009. So I mean, they basically skipped the whole PC computer era, which is why their gaming population is primarily mobile gaming, right? So
yeah.
And they kind of have a reputation for their websites not being too good because of that. They build all their websites for mobile users. That's quite fascinating. So arcades are kind of the gateway technology in a way, like you said, to computer literacy, to access to information. Like it started with arcades, and even you started with you started using ham radios as a kid. That was kind of how you got started using technology. Is that your earliest memory of kind of tinkering with technology, is your ham radio?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, ham radio was my gateway drug, no question about it.
Man, that's fascinating. And what do you think about, when you think about your history, what's your earliest memory of you expressing the way that you learn or the way you think? Or your earliest memory of being like super enthusiastic about something? Because I know now, you've talked a lot about learning, the process of learning, how to learn properly. You've been invested and interested in education for a while, educating others. What's your earliest memory of like, oh, this is where my personality and my way of thinking is actually being expressed in what I'm doing? For me, it's being completely obsessed with arcades in the early 90s. I mean, completely obsessed with Street Fighter and the like. And I'm curious what that was for you.
I think that on top of ham radio, I just loved to make little gadgets. And stupid gadgets, if you want to know. Like I wired up, I had a winter coat, and I wired it up so that I had a light bulb from a flashlight. I glued a little lens on it and a reflector, so it was basically on my lapel, and I had a button in my pocket, and I could walk down the street at night, and I had my illumination. But that wasn't enough. I painted a flashlight bulb red, and I put it on the back because I didn't want somebody to run into me.
Right.
I look at it and I think now,
Have you ever tried to remake it?
It was one of those great inventions that it had. But I also figured out how to make a shocker. And there were these little transformers that every radio had. And the radios at that point were tubes. And so you had to do a big step up. But whenever you have a step up, you have a step down. And so you could take a flashlight battery, just break the, you can't put DC in and transformer, so you'd have a little file or something to break the circuit, and then turn it around, and you could give somebody one hell of a shock. And those were really great.
Right.
Sell to people to terrorize their sisters with.
Of course.
I made those, made a lot of money on building these little shockers. I'm glad I didn't kill somebody.
Well, one of your first ventures was, selling strawberries, right?
Right.
Did you ever think of, or did you ever get back into food production, or, anything about, obviously you did have, you're a serial entrepreneur, right? You've been involved in many, many different parts of projects. You had restaurants, have many Chuck E. Cheese, to name a few. But did you ever get interested in any food sustainability, just out of curiosity, or food production, or farming, or anything like that, just out of curiosity?
No, I played Farmville a little bit from time to time.
Yeah, definitely. Same thing, right? Same thing. Well, you're a futurist, right? And this is going to be kind of a two-part question. Did the NFT project, which, like I said, congratulations on that drop, where you, for the 50th anniversary of Computer Space release, Pong, Computer Space, etc., did that give you an opportunity to really look back? Because I know you're always looking forward.
Yeah, and well, I actually saw it as looking forward to me, because the NFT space was something I was curious about, but it was a learning experience for us. So we're going to do another drop in a month or so.
Oh, great. Because I didn't get in on the first one, but I'm going to get it on the next one. Yeah, great.
We've got a whole bunch of good stuff coming that is going to be wonderful. And what we're kind of putting together a little bit is sort of a club of the people who own our NFTs will be able to join hands in the metaverse and play the arcade of the future in the metaverse. And and it's going to be driven by NFTs and cryptocurrencies and the future, because we actually think the metaverse is going to be a fun area. I mean, I don't know if you played in Second Life 10 years ago, but it was good, but it was clunky. And and I think that it's going to be fun to have a full digital environment to experiment in. And I'm kind of looking forward to being one of the architects.
Man, super excited for that. And once again, thank you for just constantly, innovating and contributing to technology, gaming, and innovation. It's inspiring to see someone that had such a huge influence in the industry still be interested in it. It's like, you're always giving back. So, we appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate that. I want to mention, though, you were talking about public spaces.
Yeah.
Have you heard about my Weird Woods project?
Weird Wicks?
Weird Woods.
Weird Woods. No, I'm not familiar.
Think about an arcade and a campground.
Yeah.
And so now we have, instead of escape rooms, we have an escape trail, where in order to get from one end to the other, you have to solve puzzles and have fun.
That sounds cool.
Instead of whack-a-mole, you have Mole Meadow. That is a 10 square yards.
Yeah.
And moles pop up out of the lawn, out of the ground.
Okay. All
you
right.
Run around with this hammer and whack them.
All right. That sounds pretty crazy. It's like a game show.
Well, the whole idea is, can we create a panoply of fun out of doors, weatherproof, what have you? I mean, I like to show off some of my fun little things. What this is?
I'm not sure. What is that?
It's a
A
piston.
pump?
It's an
Oh,
air piston.
piston. Dope. Great.
And there will be a mole on top of this, and it'll
Okay.
pop. You have to whack it.
Okay. That's brilliant. Brilliant.
Anyway, we've got a whole. We've designed 23 games that can be worked outside. Imagine a zip line in
Okay.
VR.
Okay.
Now you're zipping down, but instead of just over trees and rocks, you're going over Niagara Falls or from the top of the Empire State Building. So we can
Yeah.
create a synthetic experience on a zip line.
Yeah. That's definitely the future. That's definitely there. That's next level. I think that's pretty incredible. I think, yeah, basically like having an activity zone, right, of things that people can do, but enhancing that zone with technology and AR and VR and everything else, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
won't be
Kind
for
of like,
everybody, but there will be some people that'll love the shit out of it.
yeah, of course, 100%. And I know one of your favorite books is Ready Player One.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, and I'm curious to know what you thought about the movie, the film, and I know you're also interested in investing in virtual reality technology. How do you feel about virtual reality gaming and virtual reality experiences as it relates to gaming? I see them kind of as very different things, right? Of course, you can game in virtual reality, but virtual reality could really do anything. I mean, it's the skies are the limit. It's kind of how you want to approach the technology, right?
It's another hue on the palette. And so I think VR is great. What it does is it gives you a 360 environment that is in some ways more compelling than just a powerful screen. And I think VR is here to stay. I also like AR. AR is fun. In fact, there's a very interesting Netflix offering called Memories of Alhambra. It's a Korean series in which augmented reality runs amok. It's really fun.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I'll have to check that out. Memories of Hambra, right?
Memories of Alhambra. People are talking about the Squid Game, which is games run amok, but Memories of Alhambra I thought was quite special.
Any other favorite movies or like top recommendations for shows that people absolutely need to see? Any time period is fine.
Oh, Princess Bride for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
I watched Pan's Labyrinth the other day, and that stood up pretty well. And the one all of a sudden I can't think of the name of it, with David Bowie. It's a labyrinth, but it's not Pan's Labyrinth. Anyway.
I think it's just called Labyrinth, right?
You're right. You're exactly right. Labyrinth.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's just Labyrinth. Yeah, definitely. I'm curious a little bit, kind of switch gears a little bit about the 70s and futurism. Computer space was not only really the first video game product making history in that regard, but it also was the first video game featured in a movie, Soylent Green, which takes place in the year 2022, which will be next year. Talk to us a little bit about the 70s and futurism, because it has a very noticeable and recognizable aesthetic when we talk about futurism in the 70s and even the Atari. I mean, how George Opperman designed the logo and the feel for a lot of the Atari's games, and of course you're a big sci-fi fan. Like how how did that come together? What was the 70s and futurism all about? How did it define itself? How did it come to be? And like for Atari, for example, when you were developing it and working on it, you know, a lot of the Atari's design choices were very futuristic. They were very future forward. They even today, you know, they're timeless designs, and they're still ahead of the game. As far as the artwork and some of the covers and some of the logo design choices, colors. I mean, obviously we see it in Polycade in a lot of ways, and it still works today with Polycade. I'm just curious to like, what was that era about, and how did it feel in the 70s when people were really exploring what the year 2020, et cetera, would look like?
When people are talking about the future, science fiction, what have you, there's two distinct camps. There's kind of the post-apocalyptic noir view.
Right.
There's optimistic, everything's going to be wonderful with a catch kind of too.
Right.
Aspect. And I think that that the apocalyptic stuff was really, you know, it never really happens as fast or as bad. I mean, you know, the overpopulation and the deterioration of the world in Soylent Green for 2022, you know, that's clearly didn't happen. You know, if you look at Blade Runner, you know, the tech was there with biotech and all that, but you know, the raining all the time and sort of the people going off world and all that because life had turned into a hellhole here. Even the subsequent Blade Runner. So I think that human beings are massively adaptable to things that change, and I think that I don't see the singularity being a problem. I see the kind of continuation of what we're having now, but you know, if you look at world poverty rates, they're all plummeting. The number of people that are starving to death now in the world is very, very small compared to what was even 10 years ago, 20 years. And I expect that progress to continue. I think that there are some areas where we have some problems. I mean, governments can screw anything up, you know, and they often try to. And it's going to be interesting to see how, like, if you look at cryptocurrencies, all of a sudden, a store of value that is not manipulated by government policy, that's going to piss a lot of countries off. Like China just made it illegal to own Bitcoin, or something like that. They put a rather draconian thing in place, and so, you know, this whole idea of the state versus the individual is going to be playing out very aggressively in the next 20 years. And it'll be interesting to see who wins.
Yeah, it would be very interesting and also very concerning. Yeah, that's powerful. What is something that you want young people to think about when, you know, they're, you know, moving throughout the world and they're embracing technology, and what are things that people could be thinking, not just young people, everybody, what are things people could be thinking more about in order to, I'm assuming, future-proof themselves, to be able to, I guess in some cases, stand up for themselves, or, you know, represent themselves or communicate their ideas? How do we avoid those negative, dystopian, futuristic outlooks, perspectives?
I think that it's important that everybody be a little optimistic. I think also need to believe that they are only victims of themselves. That victimhood, where you blame others, is the fast track to despair, because you're not going to be able to control other people. You can only control yourself. And so once you decide that you're the captain of your fate and the master of your ship, you're going to be a happier person, and you can actually make the world a better place. You know, wallowing in despair and victimhood, pathway to nowhere. I think the next thing, you have to maintain a certain amount of humility. And I think that every young person needs to understand that they're massively stupid, like incredibly stupid. And that probably lasts well into your 50s. Where,
Yeah.
And so by having a learner's mind and not think you've got it all figured out is really helpful. I am just gobsmacked at how stupid the average college kid is today. When they have this arrogance about them. And there's nothing more dangerous than a stupid person that doesn't know they're stupid. You know, because the last thing you want to do is have them actually do anything.
Right.
And
I remember you said one of the worst things is to be entitled, because it's harder to learn.
Entitled and enfranchised when you have neither the capability nor the credentials.
This is brought to you by